Everyone. I am Angela Roush, the chair of Livable Sunnyvale. Can folks on Zoom hear me?
I can hear you.
Beautiful. Welcome, everyone. This is the September meeting of Livable Sunnyvale, and I have been informed by part of the group that they don't like my opening question of gratitude. So I'm going to shift a bit. So the opening question is, have you recently or anytime attended a protest, and what was that like? So I'm going to look in the room, and I know Margaret is here, and she she has. So I'm going to ask her to talk about. Hold on.
Yeah, I went to the protest on Monday. Uh, I wasn't with the Sunnyvale Democratic Club, but I was down a little bit farther, but we were still in the shade because it was so hot. But I'd also been to the Pride Parade on Sunday, so it's taken me till today to recuperate. and but the protests are always fun because there's so much reaction from the people driving by. So I recommend them. They're fun. And anyway, I made some really cool signs. Really, I was really very proud of my signs. Here, you guys.
Okay, so Mike is asking what the question is, so I'm going to answer it. So listen up, Mike. So the last protest I went to was the No Kings protest, and that was the one that was in June. And my husband and I had a great time making signs. It was really, really fun. And as Margaret said, people were quite responsive as they were driving down El Camino. It was really refreshing, and people were thanking us for standing there. So it was really nice. Okay, Mike, now you know the question, so you can answer.
Well, talking about the last protest, yeah. So the protest this Labor Day was, which is great, a 17-mile protest, and it's really a linear party. You just go there, and your friends are there, and you wave signs, and people honk, and we all agree that everybody who honks is supporting us. So we can't prove otherwise. So it was great.
Anyone on that side of the room want to share? Yes. Yes, Linda Sell is going to share.
Hi, I'm Linda Sell. I'm Vice Mayor of Sunnyvale, but I'm here in my personal capacity. So I went to the rally on Labor Day, the No Kings. I thought it was really great. I got to talk to people, and a lot of us agree that we don't like the direction things are going at the federal level and how we can all. I got people to want to volunteer for other advocacy things. So it was great.
No. Anybody? Anyone on Zoom want to share? Scott.
See if I can get my volume going. I agree with all the comments. I missed the one on Labor Day. I'm sorry. But especially the one in June was really energizing. I totally agree. I wish I had half the creativity on making a sign. Some of them were excellent. I went to an earlier version in San Jose in April. It's good to know that there are so many other like-minded individuals that have huge concerns with what's happening today.
Thank you. Anyone else on Zoom? No takers. Okay, so that was my opening question. I will just, I will share. So I took my same sign, and my sign says, where did it go? First, they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. And then they came for the unionist, trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. and that is Martin Niemöller, if I pronounced it right. And that's kind of a good segue into Livable Sunnyvale. We are here because we are advocating for all. There are voices that don't necessarily get to the table, and there are voices that need to be heard. And especially with rental rights, there are people that just don't have the time or the enough voice to speak out. So at Livable Sunnyvale, we try to help with outreach, to help with education, and that's what we're doing tonight. I want to, yes, Agnes, my vice chair, is telling me all my notes. So we want to thank Sunnyvale Community Services for hosting us here tonight. We host a hybrid meeting, so you can come in person to Sunnyvale Community Services, or you can come online on Zoom. And then I wanted to introduce some of our electeds that are here. In the room, we have Vice Mayor Linda Sell. Thank you. On Zoom, we have Commission Council Person Richard Mellinger. And in terms of commissions, we have in the room Agnes Veith, who is the Arts Commission, on the Arts Commission. Mike Cerrone is on the Planning Commission. Doug Kuntz is on the Sustainability Commission. Let's see. I think that's all that I see. Oh, Gail is also on the Charter Review, which is it a commission or a committee or a combo? It's a committee.
It's a committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Gail, for that work. So I have a few announcements. The first one is last month we had Helping Hands here. And I just wanted to say that every Saturday at 11:30, they come to the library and they help people in need. So you can come help if you would like and help distribute food or kind of watch their process. They work with folks to help assess their need and see what they can do as members of the community to serve. City Council meeting on Tuesday at 6 p.m. They have a study session where they're evaluating new revenue strategies. And also at 7 o'clock, Mid-Penn Affordable Housing, that's another study session, will come and speak, and there will be a presentation about the housing, the affordable housing that they're looking to build at 295 North Matilda. On September 20th, Saturday, the State of the City in Sunnyvale, and that's from 8:30 to 12:30 at City Hall. And finally, rounding out the end of the month, we will continue our socials. So we will be at Fibber McGee's at 6:30 on Wednesday, September 24th. And are there any other announcements in the room or on Zoom? I don't think so. Okay. So another question for folks in the room and for folks on Zoom. How many people have been renters? Margaret said 1,000,000 years ago, but that's another story. So it looks like all of us have been renters. So we're all going to be affected by this topic or know someone that is affected by rental rights and tenant protections. So when we talk about, oh, wait a second. I have another announcement, so I have to segue to another announcement. Silicon Valley at Home on September 26th is having a presentation called Where Did the Students Go? Housing and School Enrollment Crisis. And you probably noticed that some of the schools the classrooms are getting smaller. We're losing students, and part of that may be related to rents. So that's a presentation by Silicon Valley at Home on September 26th at noon, and that's online. Okay, so back to rents. In terms of affordable housing, there are 3 P's we tend to talk about in the affordable housing space: protection, production, and preservation. So production is the biggest. If we can build a lot more housing, then we can work on getting out of this housing crisis that we're in. But we also need to preserve and protect. And in terms of preservation, part of what we want to do is keep some of that affordable housing affordable, even as we build new housing. So that's preservation. But we're here tonight to talk about protections. And as we're seeing in our world, there's tends to be a bit of misinformation and a bit of fear in when we speak about certain things. So we at Livable Sunnyvale want to try to clear up some of those misconceptions and really teach people what's going on and what rights you have as renters. So one of our guests here tonight is Ryan Dyson, who is a housing specialist for the city of Sunnyvale. And as I was looking, Ryan, thanks for joining us online. As I was looking to find something out about you, I kid you not, the first thing that came up was called Transparent California, California's largest public pay and pension database. I really didn't want to know how much you made. But nevertheless, that was the first thing that came up. So then as I tried to dig a little bit deeper, I think I remember you're from Ohio.
That's correct.
And this was the other thing that popped up. Were you in the Peace Corps?
I was, yes.
Can you just, for inquiring minds want to know, can you just share a little something about that experience, please?
Wow, yeah. So I was in the Peace Corps from 2011 to 2013. I served in Guatemala, and I lived in a very rural community. And part of my job was health education. So we would work with people from our community, just very small agricultural towns, um, and educating them on preventive health concepts. And then also working with those same people that were in our education groups to build cement floors or ventilated stoves in the homes of many of the families that we were working with. So it was it's a great experience. I highly recommend it to younger folks, especially. It certainly changed the path of my life, and it got me into the housing realm where I'm at today. So it's why I'm here.
Beautiful. Thank you. Tu habla español?
See, I am. It's been it's been 12 years now, so I just haven't used it very much. And also, one of the things about Guatemala, especially in rural communities, is that they speak Maya dialect. So in my community, they spoke Quechua primarily. So we would communicate in Spanish as our collective second language.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Good. Okay. So we're going to start with you tonight. A simple question. Do what? Oh, Emily's here. Okay, good. But I'm going to start with you, Ryan. So a simple question, I think. Hello, Emily. Welcome. And maybe you can chime in on this also, Emily. Oh, come sit with us. I believe Sunnyvale and Mountain View have over 50% renters. True? Yeah.
Uh,
In just a minute.
I believe that's true. I think we have a stat in that in our housing element. I think that pretty recently, within maybe the past decade, it crossed over from predominantly homeowners to predominantly renters.
Gotcha. Okay. Do you want to do your presentation first or you want? Okay. So Emily's got that stat queued up in her presentation, so she is going to start. I probably, can you, Emily, can you sit over here? Because that way people on Zoom. How do you connect the present? I'm sorry, we're a little familiar here. So you should be able to just join Zoom. Let me, I don't have, hold on. Yes, Emily, oh, I can introduce you, Emily, right now. So, hold on. Can somebody share with Yes, it is, I don't have my name card, which has the code on it. Does anybody? Somebody will share you the code. So Emily is, let's see, where are my stuff? She is the Tenant Protection and Empowerment Associate. She assists implementing SV at Home's approach to tenant protections, affordable housing preservation, and comprehensive anti-displacement policy solutions, all undertaking in an equity framework. She is also the Vice Mayor of Mountain View. And I have a question for you. What competes in social justice or civic tech themed hackathons?
Sure. A hackathon is when it's usually done through groups or it can be done individually, but think of it as little challenges that are either sponsored by a company or an organization, and you essentially compete to build some sort of product. The last one I did was a hackathon with Hacker Dojo. They did a hackathon and we did something called Pothole Patrol, which we took data. It was from San Jose's 311 data to create a map of where potholes have been reported. We even added, one of the members of my group also wanted to add an AI element. So when people submitted potholes, it would read through it as, is it the guest network or SCS? Okay.
I got
I
it.
got it. Share that. So I'm just reading out the password. All right. There was one of my colleagues in my group. They actually wanted to add an AI element, so when someone took a picture of a pothole, it could read whether it was a pothole or not a pothole. So that was kind of fun for that thing. All right, I will get onto this Zoom. We're in
Violating the Brown Act here.
Brown Act does not apply to separate boards.
Yay, we're in the clear.
We're in lots of rooms together. We even Linda and we actually worked on like this vice mayor gathering too. So like we did vice mayors of in Santa Clara County and in San Mateo County. All right, joining. I'm gonna try to disconnect from the sound so it doesn't. How do I fucking do this? All right, good. All right, I'm gonna share the presentation now. That's a lie. Now I'm sharing the presentation. Okay. There it is. Let's see, does that work? Yay, it works. So, as I mentioned before, I am the Tenant Protection and Empowerment Associate at SB at Home. I'm also the Vice Mayor of Mountain View, so we'll provide lots of information in between. But who is SB at Home? Policy expertise. A lot of you really know SB at Home, so we're going to go through these slides really quickly. This is about the income needed to afford average asking rent sizes. You can see it really sucks out there. And how did this happen? We had economic growth without the housing. This is something everyone kind of knows. For one home for every 7 jobs. Okay. And then there's a wide range of residents affected, and like how many people are cost burden and then severely cost burden. You can see based on income levels how deeply each income levels are affected. Move this. There we go.
So Emily, if you talk more like a rock star, then people on Zoom can hear you.
Okay. And then you can see who's harmed most by the affordability crisis. So in Santa Clara County, 85% of extremely low income renter households are people on fixed incomes or low wage jobs. So like 35% are seniors, 13% are disabled, 37% are in the workforce. And so that harms a lot of people. So like cost burden, overcrowding, housing instability, food insecurity, health, educational, and employment impacts, displacement from the community, and evictions. And as we talk also about homelessness, homelessness is a housing problem. The higher rents and lack of affordable housing is more deeply correlated with the higher rates of homelessness than any other stats. So now we go to Sunnyvale demographics, Sunnyvale at a glance. So population 157,566. You have your households, household units, your population growth, the number of employed residents, and you can take a look at the percentage of housing types. So 35% are single family detached, and then 10% is single family attached. You have a large percentage of multifamily homes, 40%, that are 5 or more units. You also have a decent size mobile home population along with small multifamily units as well. Okay, so here is some of the answers to the questions before. The jobs, housing in Sunnyvale, you have a ratio of 1.89. So like you have your jobs, then employed residents per household, jobs per employed residents, and then jobs housing balance ratio. And then we also do something called jobs housing fit, which is the number of low wage jobs per low cost rental unit. And that's a 10.7. That's a really bad ratio. And then renting in Sunnyvale, the percentage of population that rents in Sunnyvale, 56.17%. Comparatively to Mountain View is at 60%. And then you have the median rent of a month of 1-bedroom apartment, which is $3,195. And that has increased over the past year by 8%. All right. So interestingly, one of the ways to address some of the tenant protections is through your housing element. So housing elements had to have incorporated affirmatively furthering fair housing. It would show how it affects various people, and that includes renters. Some deep dive of what is affirmatively furthering fair housing. You have to take meaningful actions that address significant disparities in housing needs and access to opportunities, replace segregated living patterns with integrated and balanced living patterns, and transform racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity. And you have to foster and maintain compliance with civil rights and fair housing laws. So what Sunnyvale did, this in terms of tenant protections. There were 3 programs that Sunnyvale had. One is the Renter's Choice Ordinance that is supposed to be coming up next year. This is to, as you could read from the thing, I pulled this straight from your housing element, evaluate alternatives to traditional security deposit, including rental security insurance, installment plans, reduce upfront security deposit, or considering establishing an ordinance requiring landlords who own 25 or more to provide tenants with a security deposit alternative. Like I said, that's 2026. The other 2, there's another one on the next slide. The right to lease ordinance, I believe, was already adopted since that was slated to be adopted in 2023. That gives them a right to have a 1-year lease, which would be, it's actually really more powerful than you think, because most people kind of think that's like, that's not one of the strongest protections to have. But when paired with AB 1482, which gives you essentially a just cause and an anti-gouging right once you live there for 1 year, that could be actually a very powerful thing. It's a nice bridge. Next, relocation assistance ordinance. We like to call it TREO, Tenant Relocation Assistance Ordinance. This was actually just passed earlier this year. It was this year. Well, it was passed before, but then the council recently adopted 3 months worth of rental for the relocation assistance to be 3 months market rent. Before, when it was first adopted, it was 2 months, and state law gives you 1 month. So Sunnyvale took that final step, which makes it more in line with cities like Mountain View and San Jose. All right. So I got a bunch of pre-submitted questions. So we're gonna go through most of them. So some are just gonna be really easy answers. Has rent control impacted building new housing in Mountain View? Yes and no. So when immediately in 2016, Mountain View passed a rent control law. It was a citizens initiative ballot measure called Measure V. It was adopted. Shortly after that, we actually faced something called demolition projects. So landlords would demolish their existing rent-controlled buildings to build new, either usually ownership housing. So like mostly townhomes, because everyone seems to love townhomes apparently. But what was actually really more galling about that is that sometimes say they would demolish 100 units of a rent-controlled building and replace it with 80 units townhome. No one wanted that outcome. That's no longer the case because SB 330 had a provision to prevent that. SB 330 is largely known as a production bill. However, there was one carve out that they put that it's not necessarily a carve out, but it expands the definition of downzoning. So what ended up happening is that you can't have a building have less units just generally, but rent control also gives us an additional protection. It's called a protected unit at that point. And technically the definition of a protected unit is either a rent controlled unit or a unit that has a low income family within the last 5 years. So deed restricted affordable housing would meet that. And technically if you really had a low income family in there, that should also be protected. Unfortunately, that's really hard to track. But we will get into a possible solution to that as well. So if you demolish a rent controlled units of 100 units, you have to do a 1-for-1 replacement requirement at a rent affordable to the people who are in the unit. So yay. But that prevented them from doing the demolition project. So yes, it did affect development. There are different things. The reason why it doesn't have as much impact on building new housing is because there's a law called Costa-Hawkins. It's a state law that prevents you from putting rent control onto new buildings. So like you can't build a new rent control building. It's literally impossible. All buildings, even if you get past rent control like right now, it could only apply to buildings that were built before 1995. February of 1995 to be specific, because that's when that law passed. How do rental costs in Mountain View compare to those in the surrounding cities? It still sucks. There's no really way around that. Rent is high because no one city can solve this problem on its own. But what we can do, it's interesting. Rent control and tenant protections are really, well, rent control, I don't view it as an affordable housing policy. I view it as an anti-displacement policy. So if you view that as kind of like the goals, the way to build more housing is to, the way to get more affordable housing is to build more housing, preferably affordable housing. But there's also a hope that if you build enough housing, it will get affordable. We're just not close to that point yet. All right. So the third question, does Mountain View have any inspections of rental housing to check for safety like smoke alarms, repairs needed, and heating cooling? Yes, we have a proactive rental inspection program. And landlords are required to pay into that every year. When we pass our rent control law, they also have to pay for that too. And so we do that at the same time. Then 4, we hear from undocumented residents that landlords threaten to call ICE if they complain about needing repairs, which will lead me to my next slide. There are tenant protections, and it doesn't matter what your documentation status is, those tenant protections apply to all. So those tenant protections are the statewide rent caps and the just cause evictions, like AB 1482, a right to a habitable home, rights to organize with other tenants, and protected from retaliation for asserting their rights. It doesn't matter if you are undocumented, you have those rights. And so as we go, what the state already covers in terms of an anti-harassment ordinance is just what would probably be that coverage. So civil code like 919402 prohibits threats to report immigration status as a form of harassment. Landlords cannot evict or intimidate tenants based on their immigration status. But local ordinance can go further. You have some examples from San Francisco, Oakland, and Los Angeles. You can define and prohibit broader forms of landlord enforcement. And the big thing is provide enforcement and civil penalties. That is where the meat comes from. Because especially if it's a state law that covers your rights, if your only method to getting access to that is through the court system, that might be difficult. Next, continuing on, I got a lot of pre-submitted questions. Yes. Hold up.
We only have one microphone, so we're going to run around.
As a practical matter, though, if you're undocumented and there is something wrong with you, are you going to ask that landlord to fix something? Because even though there are all these rights that you can't intimidate, you can't retaliate and all that, as a practical matter, if I were undocumented, no way would I complain. Just because I wouldn't trust it. I wouldn't trust the laws.
This is the case where essentially building tenant power would come much significantly. So like maybe if it's not your own, it always depends on the thing that's broken. Now, if your roof is falling in, that might be worth complaining about ahead of time. You might even be able to just report that to code enforcement. And so you don't have to worry about the landlord that way, because then you have actually an open, an actual case. Some anti-retaliatory, anti-harassment ordinances, they actually prevent landlords from evicting you at all within a certain time frame of a complaint coming through. So like that's not even like an option at that point. There's nothing we can do to stop someone from calling ICE. People call on ICE for really anything. I don't know if you guys heard about like certain celebrities. I'm a big Cat's Eye fan. They're like a K-pop group, but like American. Well, they're like a global K-pop group. Anyway, it's like a big thing for like MAGA people to call ICE on some of the members of the K-pop group, even though they're American. But one is of Indian descent and one is of API descent. So they just call on ICE just to mess with them. There's nothing we can do about that. So I guess it's just a kind of a reasonable thing. to think through. So how do you prevent that direct contact in order to do that? One, you could complain to someone different from your landlord, like the city, or you could do it as a tenant action, essentially. Like it would be if you created a tenant association with all the tenants in the union and they put the complaint, they can't say it was that one person who's undocumented. It's the whole building.
So Ryan, do you want to weigh in on maybe something you are privy to in Sunnyvale? I know we have it's escaping me. They've presented it Livable Sunnyvale before. Project Sentinel. Do you want to say something about Margaret's question?
Yeah, so I haven't dealt with this in particular, but we have in the past. I know I've received calls from folks that have had similar complaints just around not wanting to bring up substandard conditions that they have in their rental unit because they're afraid of being evicted. So this is it's a tricky situation because yeah, they don't want to bring it up. They don't want to lodge any sort of formal complaint. We can do all sorts of things. We can handle this within the city in terms of we can create a neighborhood preservation complaint against the property that would be anonymous. Again, it does get tricky because if you have only one tenant in a building or one tenant that's renting out a single family home, for example, the landlord's going to know who's complaining. And those tenants don't want to get the landlord suspicious of their turning them into the city or something like that. So we do typically involve Project Sentinel when it comes to that. We ask for their advice on how to proceed with something like that, just because we want to do what the tenant is comfortable with. But we don't want to go beyond that in terms of getting them evicted or retaliated against, even though that is illegal. It's a concern that many tenants have. And we often have that discussion with them, but we do ask that they contact Project Sentinel to get more information and really understand what their rights are in those circumstances.
Oh, Chuck wants to ask something. Hold on.
Just related to this, you mentioned Mountain View as a proactive inspection program where they'll go in and kind of inspect sites to make sure that they're habitable and everything. Yeah, do you think that has been effective at reducing the amount of substandard conditions, or would that be an approach that could be used to address some of these? It obviously wouldn't catch everything, but do you think that actually makes a meaningful difference, just proactively having the city go out and do inspections from time to time?
No worries. I mean, it's hard to say like if it was effective or not, because the goal is for us to not have any issues, kind of thing. I will say that they do find things when they do a proactive rental inspection. So like they find if there's issues with sprinklers, there are issues with unsafe conditions. It's through our, so code enforcement is kind of jointly between our city attorney's office and our firefighters department. And they take their jobs very seriously. So they usually find something if it's not. Now things do slip. So an interesting thing about habitability, because Mountain View does have a rent control law, they have a mechanism where residents and tenants can file petitions to the rent board for a decrease in rent when habitability does not meet a standard that is necessary. And then there is I forgot what it's called. There's actually a hearing officer that takes the case and they inspect the unit about the habitability conditions and then determine what kind of if it deserves a deduction in rent. And from there, they put it through, kind of thing, until it is either fixed or addressed in another way. And then they could be that decision could be appealed by either the tenant or the landlord to the rent board itself. Oh,
So Ryan, Emily kind of went through, I think it was on slide 10, the programs that Sunnyvale has, which were from the housing element. She says these are the new programs. So can you speak a little to H26?
Yeah. So this is we have some work to do on the relocation assistance program as well, but Renter's Choice Ordinance is one that will be coming up. And we've hired some new help in our housing division. We have another housing specialist. We have a part-time housing specialist who's joining us on this call right now. And we'll also have another housing specialist joining us later this month, who will start work on this program in particular. Right now, there are a variety of different alternatives to traditional security deposits out there. Some of them, they involve various different ways that tenants can provide a much lower payment up front or potentially pay their security deposit essentially as a bond. There's upsides and downsides to each of these different types of programs. But this is something that we would be working on over the course of the next year and then taking to council later on to consider adoption.
So that's concerning a security deposit, right?
Right. Yeah. So basically, in lieu of providing a traditional security deposit,
Which is 1 month's rent in the state of California, correct?
right. Yeah. As of 2024, I believe. Or I don't, maybe it kicked in this year. But yes, it's limited to 1 month's rent statewide. But still, that represents, potentially $3,000 on top of the first month's rent. So that's going to be a huge hurdle for many people who have either been evicted or just searching for housing. This provides another mechanism that would allow those people that are looking for housing to pay an alternative or provide an alternative that wouldn't be that $3,000 or $2,000, $2,500, whatever it happens to be, up front. They would be able to pay into a security deposit alternative program.
Interesting. Okay.
And this could occur right now. As a city, we could potentially require landlords to accept a security deposit alternative.
Hi, I had a question for you. I think when the question was asked by Chuck about whether you can inspect these units to kind of, prevent that, are those inspections random or are they done at regular intervals? Because I mean, if you can submit a complaint and have it be conducted randomly, then you can actually protect those tenants specifically who make those complaints and have it be anonymous, right? And I don't think the question for Sunnyvale was answered as to how inspections are done. So I'm not sure if that's coming.
Brian, you're on. Does Sunnyvale do inspections for rental units?
So unlike Mountain View, we don't have a rental board. And we don't do proactive inspections of units. We don't keep a rental registry. So we do inspections based on complaints. And typically those complaints are going to be what is visible from the public right of way. However, they can be lodged by tenants in a building who can complain about substandard living conditions. And our neighborhood preservation department, which is a part of our Department of Public Safety, will investigate those complaints.
So kind of just to keep you on the hot seat a bit, if we were to look, part of what we do at Livable Sunnyvale is poke around with ideas and maybe whisper them in council people's ears or whatever. But if we were to do a rental registry, is that how I'm not going to ask you the mechanics of it, but what do you see happening with that? And would you lump these things in uh, like a deposit fund or something? Sorry, I didn't articulate that quite well. So what, a rental registry? Oh, so I'm going to turn that back over to Emily to have her explain what that is.
I do have another slide that touches on it. But before that, I see questions in the chat. So someone already asked how often are rentals inspected. I actually don't really know. But what are the consequences to a landlord if they do not comply with the issues found? Usually it's a fine. It depends on how extreme the case is. So it could be it could be a warning, it could be a fine, and in the most extreme cases, it could be red tagged. And red tag means that no one could live in there. So that's actually kind of not an ideal situation for really anyone, but that usually happens when it's no longer safe to live in. So there is such thing as called red tag evictions. This actually happened in Palo Alto a couple years ago, and there's really not much you can do about it. But basically, the city red tagged a building that a bunch of Stanford students were living in, and they had to leave. And they're like, "Where are we gonna go? What are we gonna do? Do we get relocation assistance?" Yes, they probably would get relocation assistance, depending on how you structure your ordinance. Landlords would be very upset about that because one, they're losing the habitability of their property, and now they also have to pay out all these tenants. So it's a thing that you would have to navigate. And so those are kind of the ranges of the consequences. What percentage of rental units in Mountain View or Sunnyvale are pre-1995 and subject to rent controls? You'd be surprised how many of our buildings are pre-1995. I don't have an exact percentage, but a good chunk of it, because at some point around the 80s, look, a lot of the housing stock, especially the housing stock that is essentially what I like to call naturally affordable, were built like in the 50s and 60s. It was in the 80s where things really kind of not really developed. So pre-1995 structures, especially rental units, that's going to be a large chunk of your rental stock. All right. Let's see. So I talked about, okay. So see, slide about rent registry. So we also hear that low income residents sometimes pay in cash, so they don't have a record that proves they have paid. The landlord may claim they still owe rent. This is tenant education right there. Never pay in cash. Don't do that. Just don't do that. There's really very little we can do to protect that. Just don't do that. Pay in a way that you can track. Take a picture of your cash. I don't really care. But always keep records, because that is your only defense on some of these things. Next, what are other tenant protections you see as being fruitful? I'm going to go through a whole set of slides that have a whole bunch of tenant protections, but I'm going to go through very quickly because we don't have a lot of time and there are a lot of them. And that includes, does Mountain View have a rental registry? And yes, we do. But I actually wouldn't lead with Mountain View's example of a rent registry because it is tied to our rent stabilization law. What I would lean on is the city of Palo Alto, who just implemented their rent registry this year. They did not tie it with their rent stabilization because they don't have rent stabilization. So that might be a model you may want to follow. Okay, so in some of these policies, I address them being based on, I bundled them into different policy solutions. So addressing high rents and lack of affordability. So I like doing problem and then the solution, because every single time you put a tenant, I swear to God, every single time you put like a tenant protection forward, you're going to have certain groups against it saying, what is this trying to solve? This is what they're trying to solve. So rents are increasing faster than wages. This is where rent control and rent stabilization would be to address that. Tenants, as you can see, I didn't list rent control and rent stabilization as a solution to affordable housing. This is a solution that the rents are increasing faster than what people are increasing in their wages. Next, anti-gouging laws. Tenants are severely rent burdened and unable to absorb large increases in rent. That is why you do have anti-gouging laws. Now, it's really kind of a nuance between what is anti-gouging versus rent control. What we have in the state is considered anti-gouging. Just think of it as just a larger percentage allowed. In the state, it's 5% plus CPI. Rent control is usually 5% or lower. Next is a rent registry, and that solves the lack of rental data. If you look at like what are the average rents in the city, the data that you rely on are essentially new units on the market when you think about it, because that's where you get to see the rents. And those new units on the market are usually market rents, not a rent of someone who's been in that unit for a really long time kind of thing. And a good rent would probably not be on the market for that long. So you don't really have an accurate sense of average median rents really in most cities. But with a rent registry, you could have really pinpointed data on that. I see a hand up from Miss Gale.
Hi,
Hi, Miss Gale.
how are you, Miss Emily? So, I don't know if my question's out of left field or not. I am fortunate that I lived in New York City, and New York State has very, very strong rent controls and rent protections. And I'm wondering if either of you have any idea about the appetite in the state legislature to pass rent protections like they have in New York. The interesting thing about New York is rich people rent. And when rich people rent, it's easier to get rent protections than when poor people rent. So if that's just an aside, but if you could talk a little bit about that and the state, I know there's some state rent folks around, and if they're pushing, and is YIMBY helping with getting some rent protections statewide? Thanks.
Thanks, Miss Gale.
You're
Okay,
welcome.
so there's rent control and rent stabilization. A lot of people use them interchangeably, but if you were going to go on a nuance, rent control is what New York has. Rent stabilization is what California has. When they say rent control, they limit the amount of rent by the actual one. They could say that you can't increase rent, or you could only increase it by a set dollar amount. That would be rent control. Rent stabilization is by percentages. You can increase the rent by 5%, 10%, 20%. CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, also known as inflation. California has rent stabilization that is also tied back to the law. Wow, my hand just kind of shows. That ties back to Costa-Hawkins. Costa-Hawkins prevents essentially rent control, but explicitly allows rent stabilization. Other things that Costa-Hawkins affects, not just what gets covered, so new units aren't covered. It also affects something called vacancy control. So units and rent-controlled apartment units have to be decontrolled. So when someone leaves that apartment. So say you are living in an apartment for like 10 years and it was rent controlled that entire time. Landlord was only able to raise it a few times. But when that tenant moves out, the landlord can put that rent back onto the market at market rate. And then that new tenant would be controlled based on that base rent. Think of it as like Prop 13. But that's another conversation. And so apartment units cannot be vacancy controlled. However, Costa-Hawkins does not cover mobile homes. So in Mountain View, we have our mobile home rent stabilization ordinance, and that is vacancy controlled. So when a mobile home park resident sells their unit, their rent is still the same and increased from there. Next, policy solutions 2, emergencies and evictions. Yes? What's going on?
I just had a question.
In the 80s. In the 80s, Costa-Hawkins hadn't passed yet. Costa-Hawkins was adopted in 1995. So that's why. Exactly. So Berkeley had to have changed their rent control law to comply with state law. All right. Policy solutions 2, emergencies and evictions. uncertainty when you may lose your home. That's just cause for evictions. That means landlords can only evict you for certain set reasons. We have what we call no-fault evictions and at-fault evictions. So no-fault evictions are when you're evicted for reasons that's not your fault. Like the landlord wants to move into his own unit. The landlord wants to remove the unit from the market. The landlord wants to take a bulldozer to the unit. You will be evicted, and that is not your fault. That's usually the reason why tenant relocation assistance happens, is triggered. At fault evictions. This is when it's absolutely your fault you're getting evicted, like you didn't pay your rent, criminal activity, nuisance, not following the rules for your lease. There you can get evicted, and there's different rules for each type of eviction. The other policy is rent relief, emergency rental assistance. Surprisingly, actually not surprisingly, very popular because it doesn't take a lot of political will. The issue with this is the funding required to back it. But everyone seems to love this because the landlords get their money, the tenants don't get evicted, everyone happy except whoever holds the purse strings. Eviction Help Center. This is something both adopted by San Jose and Mountain View, just a place for tenants to go if they have help. Most cities, they get by with Project Sentinel. So like Project Sentinel has kind of a helpline to help them with most of their stuff. But it also is kind of nice to have a place that's designated for your city with your city's unique protections having. And it could also help for like when they want to apply for affordable housing and stuff like that. And then eviction intervention, mediation, legal assistance, and right to legal counsel. So like if you receive an eviction, you don't know what to do. What do you do? Having some kind of program for eviction intervention is helpful. Sunnyvale has mediation. Like most cities have mediation. Legal assistance, that's a little bit more rare, and that's Mountain View and San Jose. And no one currently has right to legal counsel adopted in the county. Yep.
So Ryan, in terms of Sunnyvale, where are we on this slide in these policies solutions?
Yeah, so right now, we have the just cause for eviction that's contained at the state level, and our relocation assistance program goes beyond what the state provides in state law AB 1482. Just to clarify, our current relocation assistance is just at 2 months rent. Council has provided us direction to proceed with 3 months rent. But we have also been instructed to do much more community engagement and outreach around that. So that's what we're going to be working on for the rest of this year, is coming back out to the community, out to tenants, to property managers, landlords, with a survey to get their thoughts on increasing the current relocation assistance amount from 2 months to 3 months rent. It's also just functions as an extra means of educating the population. We adopted the relocation assistance amount of 2 months back in 2023, but I think we can still do a lot more education just to make sure that the public is aware of that's what Sunnyvale is requiring. So before we do consider raising it to 3 months rent, we will be going out and doing a lot more community engagement. And that will be kicking off in October, where we do launch a survey and social media and materials to really get some feedback on increasing the relocation assistance amount. I think Emily summed it up very well. Sunnyvale does offer, the city doesn't offer direct emergency rental assistance, but the county distributes emergency rental assistance through nonprofits such as Sunnyvale Community Services. City of Sunnyvale does not have an eviction help center, and we do offer mediation through Project Sentinel as well. But we don't have our own eviction help center that would offer those services.
Marie Bernard has her hand up. Marie?
Hello, everybody. Sorry I couldn't be there in person, but you're in our space, and hi to Emily. I just wanted to point out on this slide that Sunnyvale Community Services is very involved in all four of these solutions, especially the rent relief, the emergency rental assistance. Last year, we distributed over $3 million. Some of it actually did come from a small amount of it from city sources, but most of it comes from foundations and government from the county. So you're right about that, Ryan. But also people, when they're not sure where to go to help or receive an eviction, we're usually a first door that people will go through. And so this is a lot of responsibility, though, because of all the citations that we've just heard about, the income divide and the growing number of people who are not going to be able to afford rent. So this is and usually what we try to do is to make it so that people come to us before they receive the actual eviction notice, because there's a lot more you can do there, because Emily can talk about the fact that when you get an eviction on your record, it stays with you, I believe, 7 years. And it is like a black mark. It's like being told that you were incarcerated, and you are not able to usually rent very effectively or at a reasonable price. I also did have a question, because I know that there is a state law that says 1 month of of uh, of deposit, and but we still see landlords trying to get around that, and trying to figure out another way to charge more for people moving in, especially if they have an eviction notice. But this is a big, big area that I want to thank everybody, and our sister agency in Mountain View is CSA, and there's a never we do not have enough money, even though we gave out over $3 million last year.
I have a question to Marie. Hi, Marie. Since you are so closely, Sunnyvale Community Services deals so closely on these issues, of these
Mhm.
items that Vice Mayor Mountain View offered, what do you think priority-wise would you like prioritize for Sunnyvale that would most help Sunnyvale from the customers, clients that you help?
Well, in one of the previous slides, it was having a rental registry would be amazing to have, because that would give us all data that we could talk about, because we have relationships with landlords all over the city and, in fact, all over the county. And it would be interesting to see what, first of all, the just cause eviction and all of the work that Emily talked about, educating the tenants, is so important. And we can never do enough of that, because people do not know what their rights are, or else they're afraid about it, because, again, many of our clients are themselves immigrants or just afraid. And so there's a lot of power that a landlord might have. But at the same time, we also want to educate landlords and support them, because especially during the pandemic, they were suffering because this was their income. This was their way of paying for food on their table, or paying their own mortgages or their own costs. And making it so that we build a community of landlords, have the rental registry, but also build a community for them to exchange best practices and also educate them, and really build some bridges between landlords and the tenants, because that's really where it plays very well, is when we help somebody with rental assistance and we say, here's a check from Sunnyvale Community Services, the landlord gets to know us, and we also stand behind or next to or in back of the tenant and say, we're vouching for them, and to pay this rent, but also we want to be able to support them in other ways so that they can remain tenants of that landlord, because it's expensive to have to re-rent, and having to go through that sifting process again of finding tenants. So it's everybody's best interest that if we cultivate the landlords and build a community of them and educate them, but definitely tenant rights, we cannot do that enough. I hope,
Thank you.
hopefully, Vice Mayor, I I answered some of that. So we
Thank you.
get a lot more of all the above.
Ryan, I kind of wanted you and Emily to have a little bit of a discussion on if Sunnyvale was going to, let's just say Sunnyvale said, go do a rental registry. Ryan, what kind of questions or what things would you look to do in there? And Emily, what would you suggest based on what you've seen in Mountain View and with Palo Alto's new registry?
So interestingly, Palo Alto is doing like a tiered set. So they start out with the larger units first, and then as that gets more use, then they go for the smaller units. Because this is not tied to a rent control law, they're doing a lot of focus on reporting what they call significant events. I don't think that's actually what they call it, but that's kind of how, like if they have to report when they evict a tenant, they have to report when there's a changeover of tenants. They have to report if there was an eviction notice served before that changeover, because sometimes you can send an eviction notice, the tenant, and it could be an at-fault one. So like, for example, the tenant was late on their rent and they get an eviction notice. They pay the rent and everything's hunky-dory. Or if they have to report when they increase the rent and how much they increase the rent. And then you see that, and then you find out maybe like a month later, then there's a changeover in tenant. You know exactly why that tenant left. And so that's, it's more nuanced. One of the things that we struggled in, both in Mountain View, although they say that Palo Alto is working out a little better, in Mountain View, we initially made our rent registry voluntary. That was a bad idea. Never do that. Don't do that. If you make it voluntary, they will not do it. We even added a thing that you didn't have to pay the fees on one unit if the landlord was living in it or something like that. That was like one of the exemptions of the fees if you registered your unit. And we have about 660 units that should be registered. In the first year when we made it voluntary, I believe about 30 apartment units registered out of 660. So that was just bad. Then we made it mandatory, and then it jumped up to 60 apartments doing it, and we just had to track down until we added. There was a lot of jokes of like carrots and sticks, and we're just like, there was like almost like a groundwork campaign just yelling more sticks in order to make that happen. And so now we're at a 95% compliance rate. Palo Alto, when I talked to their staff about it, they said they feel good with the response they got. And I don't know what feel good to them is, because I don't know if that means 25% or 75% or 99%. But yeah, it's something to kind of think through. And this is the first year that they're actually implementing it in Palo Alto.
So Ryan, what are your thoughts about, to put you on the spot? There's nobody here that's going to tell on you, but what are you thinking about a rental registry? Have you heard of it before? Is it something that you think that might come down the pike? What are your thoughts and feelings on it? I see you
Well,
have new help. If you want to, not help, new people in your department, if you want to introduce them and maybe they want to say something about what their experience with the registry is.
well, I believe we have Samantha Luke on the call. I will not put her on the spot because she just joined our team last Monday. So she's I wouldn't do that to her. But as far as a rental registry, it's definitely, I think, come up, especially in the city's history, as the city is considered rent control. I don't know when the last time that was, but it predates me. Um, but at least one point in time in history, Sunnyvale is considered uh, rent control, and it did not pass. And so I think that the rental registry kind of went out the window with that. I think that if rent control is not part of the conversation, then the rental registry really functions as a means of enforcing our tenant protections laws and providing an extra layer of assurance to tenants and to city staff that property managers, landlords are following the tenant protection laws the city has enacted and also the state laws as well. And we can use that in enforcement of those laws. So that to me is the real advantage of having the rental registry. And I think, like Emily said, those things of, being able to see when the rent has been raised at a property, if there are any sorts of significant events or things like that. If there have been, we can tell when there has been reports of substandard living conditions. We do have that information, but we may not always have it. And if we have a rental registry, we could potentially have more access to that information when we're, in better contact with landlords.
This is maybe a question for both of you. I mean, what kind of staff needs to be? I mean, are we talking like a lot of staff? I don't know. Or can AI do this or what?
Somehow Palo Alto has made do with one staffer on this, which I am surprised that they've done. In Mountain View, we have a staff for our rent stabilization program. And in that case, also it was one staffer that handled it, but it took a large chunk of her time, especially on the onboarding. And then Palo Alto, I looked it up because Richard asked me about this earlier. He's like, how much does the system cost? And it was Palo Alto allocated around $450,000 for the system.
And
I
and I'll
forgot what
add that
Mountain View was though.
Sunnyvale is a bit larger, so I think that one staff member, I don't think could get the job done. I think we did need at least two.
I always find Sunnyvale so deceptively large. Like I was like, oh yeah, Sunnyvale's the same size as Mountain View. It's like, no, it is not. It's twice the size. Okay, so shall we?
So Doug has a question, and no, that we're going to wrap up soon here because we could talk about tenant protections for a while. And Himanshu, did I pronounce it correct? Has also a question.
Emily, I'm curious, you mentioned that Mountain View does proactive code enforcement, and we also had the conversation about, concerns about retaliation against tenants for reporting. So I'm curious, if there's proactive code enforcement, does that reduce the concern about retaliation? Like if the landlord thinks that it might just be, a random inspection versus something that was triggered by a complaint?
I'm going to flip this to be slightly different. If a tenant receives retaliation, what do you think their resolutions are? What are their resolutions in Sunnyvale? Who do they go to? I think if you want to prevent retaliation, you have to know what happens if they are retaliated against. Do they go to Project Sentinel? Do they go to the city itself? Is there an easy number to call the city if something like this happens? Can the city even do something about it? In our case in Mountain View, we do have a rent board, and that has kind of been our catch-all for a lot of issues with habitability because there are consequences if they don't have habitability. You can decrease their rent if they lose habitability. Would you risk retaliation if it means decreasing your rent? Probably. Would you risk retaliation if there's nothing anyone can do about it? No. So like with tenant protections, there's not going to be one single tenant protection that's going to solve all our issues. But they all kind of work together. So when you think about trying to prevent retaliation, like what if we have habitability requirements and the tenant's scared to use them? You have to ask, why are they scared to use it? What are the mechanisms for it? So that's kind of my answer for that. I don't know if that gives you an answer because, like, quite honestly, probably most tenants, there's a point where it's just like, is this something for me to fight for, or is this something not? And it's always a personal calculation in your head. When I turn on my heat, there's kind of a smoky thing because I guess dust settles after a while. Do I bring that up to my landlord? I don't find it worth it. I'm happy with my rent right now. So everything's kind of like that personal choice. The question is, how easy do you make it for people to complain about it without fear of retaliation?
I'm going to ask you to
Oh,
do those kind of
oh,
wrap up so that we
yes.
can-
So, okay. So there's anti-harassment policy, which I mentioned before. So that's dealing with the problems of harassment from landlord. Anti-harassment policy, tenant unions, right to organize, legal services. If there's loss of habitability, we mentioned code enforcement, proactive rental inspection, changes in ownership. That could come with various consequences, including increased rent, changes in how you get to live, Community Opportunity to Purchase Act, also known as COPA TOPA. Next, even under best protections, sometimes you are forced to leave, and there's various reasons. So, like a demolition or removal from market, first right of return policy is basically if you get removed from the unit because they're demolishing it and they're redeveloping it, you get a first right of return. A one-for-one replacement requirement. If you demolish a naturally affordable unit, you have to replace it with an affordable unit. Those two rights are actually through SB 330. High moving costs, tenant relocation assistance, and they touched upon that as well. Difficulty with finding a new place. This is actually interesting. This is called a landlord set aside units. So like if a landlord has to remove those units from the market, if they are a large enough landlord, say like a Prometheus or a Zell Properties or something like that, they also have the option to move you into one of their other units. That that's not an official policy. However, it's something that landlords have actually suggested as a policy solution, especially if they're larger landlords and they have the capability. It doesn't cost them as much comparatively. Um, all right. If you have a high security deposit, adopting a security deposit limit. The state has one. That's one. But Sunnyvale is going a little bit farther by having other possible alternatives to a security deposit. Inability to rent due to history of conviction or incarceration. This is where a fair chance ordinance, also known as ban the box, but it's housing focused. Most ban the box ordinance that people hear about are related to jobs. So like you can't ban someone from applying for a job because of history of incarceration. There is a movement to adopt policies for housing. Difficulty with finding an affordable unit. Tenant preference. This is also a very politically popular thing, to set aside certain units in a new affordable housing project for certain preferences. So like a neighborhood preference, a displacement risk preference, and a displaced resident preference. So the neighborhood preference is like for the people in that area. So San Jose recently adopted one like that, a neighborhood preference, where it's by council district. So if you built a affordable housing complex in that district, then the people in that district have a leg up a little bit. You have to be very careful with that because of fair housing laws. There is a state law Cortese passed a few years back to create a process on how you can show that you are not discriminating against people of color by creating this preference. The next one, so the neighborhood preference is politically most popular, difficult to do with fair housing, and you just have to do the calculations on that. It's based on like the diversity of your existing city and that area. The next one is a displacement risk preference. So if you live in an area that has a census tract that has high risk of displacement, you can also get a preference based on that. San Jose uses this anti-eviction displacement map from UC Berkeley to determine those tracks. And then displaced resident preference. This is Mountain View is looking at that right now. San Jose that's their part 2 of tenant preference, and Morgan Hill is looking at it. So if you are a resident that got displaced from your home for various reasons, it depends on whatever it is. In Mountain View, as I mentioned, we had the demolition projects. We plan on creating a program that if your unit got demolished, you get a preference in affordable housing. So those are a bunch of policies in a nutshell. And the final thing of pre-submitted questions: is there an upper limit to what a landlord can charge and a fund to assist renters? So yes, there's an upper limit, state law, 1 month's rent. I thought it was 1.5, but it could be 1 month. And a fund to assist renters who do not have financial capacity to pay a security deposit. I do not know of a fund that exists for that. The closest I can see is when we had an affordable housing project that was an ownership project. Sometimes low income owners have trouble what am I called paying the HOA fees. So as part of a development for an ownership project, Mountain View has a requirement that a developer does have to set aside some sort of fund to help with HOA fees if they get too high. That may get cut in the future because we want more ownership housing, and that is a barrier to ownership housing, affordable ownership housing. Let's see, next, how are annual rent increases determined? In Mountain View, it is based on the CPI, local CPI, local urban index. And it's interesting because it actually technically doesn't cover Mountain View. It's like core urban areas like Hayward, San Francisco, Oakland, or something like that. It's a really weird index, but there are set indexes, and it's like from February to February. And that's that the rent board finds out about it in like June. It sets that as the new rent beginning in September. And then what if a landlord feels they need to charge more than the approved annual increase? There is a petition process, and we use they submit a petition, and usually they have to give a lot of information about their costs and expenses. Usually if like they can petition if there's like a big increase, or if, especially as you just started doing rent stabilization, they had historically kept their rents low, but like they always thought they could raise the rent like higher if they needed, and now they need it. And so they would submit a petition based on certain standards of what the reasonable rent would be considered. And then it would go through a process through a hearing officer, and then they could appeal that decision. Both landlord and tenant can appeal that decision to the rent board. And if they don't agree with the decision, then they go through the courts. As opposed to usually right now, they just go through the courts. I've seen questions. Could you share how Mountain View purchase support for the unhoused? Does the city collaborate with community partners, nonprofits, or is it mainly handled within city departments? Lots of collaboration. So the equivalent for Mountain View of Sunnyvale Community Service is Community Services Agency of Mountain View, Los Altos Hills. They are big partners. We also partner with an organization called Move Mountain View. They do also a lot of direct services to people primarily in our RV population, our RV resident population. We have the second largest RV safe parking sites. The only one beats us is San Jose, and they're 10 times our size. So we're really pulling our weight. And we do have 2 home key projects in Mountain View. One was the first home key project, and it was a big deal because Gavin Newsom even came, and Ellen got to like say stuff. It was great. It was like in the midst of a pandemic, and that was the home key with Life Moves. And our second one was a hotel conversion. It was the Crestview Hotel. It's now called the Heartwood Apartments, and that is the Crestview Hotel is permanent supportive housing, while Life Moves is a transitional housing. Crestview is open, and they have tenants in. Yes.
I think that might be a good note to end on and move on to our next topic. Emily has a lot of information and is a wealth of knowledge. Ryan, we're going to continue this conversation because it sounds like you may need our help when you start rolling out some of these surveys and tenant protection things that you guys are thinking of. So we are always here. We will give you the entire floor and won't have to share it with Mountain View. But I think that is going to be it for this discussion. Thank you. So Ryan, you have Samantha's with you.
Yeah, Samantha Luke. She'll be leading the tenant protections outreach as we launch that in October. So we'll definitely keep in touch. And yeah, I don't know if she wants to introduce herself. She's more than welcome to.
Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha. I just recently joined the city of Sunnyvale last week, and I just got started working on the survey that Ryan mentioned earlier. We're planning to roll that out next month, so we're excited to talk to you guys more later. So,
Beautiful. Welcome. Welcome. Thank you.
thank you.
I am going to move this to Agnes, who's going to introduce our next speakers. Oh, Oh, and thank you, Emily and Ryan. Yes, that was.
Thanks,
We
everyone.
have Emily is calling out a rent board member on Zoom, and that would be Kevin Ma. Oh, okay. Very good. We know Kevin. Oh, excellent.
Angela, can I say hello to Michael and to Wendy because they showed up at our board meeting today at Sunnyvale Community Services. So you get frequent flyer miles today. I'm dialing in for tonight though. Whoops.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Thank you, Marie. I was just virtual for that, for your board meeting, so don't give me too much credit.
No, that's okay. You showed up. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. I just want to do a time check to make sure that I keep you be respectful of your time and okay. Oh, this is important.
Okay, so I want to introduce, Marie kind of stole a little thunder there, and that's just fine. Wendy Ho, and Wendy is with the County of Santa Clara. And Wendy, would you like to give a little bit of your background?
Sure. Thanks, Agnes, and to Livable Sunnyvale for the invitation. By day, I serve as Supervisor Lee's Chief of Staff, but I'm here in my capacity as a super volunteer for the Measure A campaign, to be very, very clear. I've spent most of my career working in the nonprofit sector and doing a lot of grass tops policy work. And so I'm very familiar with a lot of the tenant protections that Emily just spoke of, because those are things I advocated for in cities across the county. But now I have the distinct pleasure of serving as Supervisor Lee's Chief of Staff and have my hand in just about everything. So, and I'm so glad to be here back again at SES. As Marie mentioned, I was here earlier this afternoon for her board meeting. So it is like a second home to me in some respects.
So I also want to introduce Michael Elliott, who is the chairperson for Measure A campaign. And if you'd give some of your background, please.
Sure. Like Wendy, I also have a day job. I'm normally the executive director of Valley Health Foundation, which is the nonprofit charity organization founded to support our public county hospital system here in Santa Clara County. And this is actually my first time, though. This is an organization I've long admired. This is my first time here at SCS. So, Marie, next time you'll have to give me a tour, but this is a beautiful facility. And I'm actually really looking forward to this conversation. This has been one of the first sort of non-health oriented organizations that I've had a chance to talk to Measure A about. And I think there is a lot of shared priorities and sort of intersections of our work. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
So as probably most of you know, we are going to have Measure A on our ballot in the fall, and Livable Sunnyvale wanted to get ahead of the curve on this and invite people early as possible to give you information on what Measure A is. We've got a series of questions that we want to ask both Wendy and Michael, and you can also put your questions in the chat. And for those of you that are in the room, you can certainly raise your hand as well. So I'm going to start with the first question to get things going. So question number one, why was a regressive tax proposed for this measure? Why not propose another type of a tax? Yes. Oh, maybe we should, sorry. I know what Measure A is. Maybe we should go backwards here. Thank you, Chuck. Okay, who would like to, Michael?
Great question. So I'll give you the very quick summary. I think a lot of you were aware of the big beautiful bill, as the current president calls it, the federal budget, which passed on July 3rd. The cornerstone of that budget was to finance tax cuts largely to wealthy individuals through the largest cut to Medicaid funding in the program's 60-year history. It's going to be $1 trillion cut cumulatively. And when we think of Medicaid, we often think, well, okay, that's hospital services, but really Medicaid is a foundational funding source for our entire safety net across. It provides a tremendous amount of in-home support care. It provides care in nursing homes, really from cradle to, I guess I shouldn't say grave, but for the entire spectrum of your life, it is the largest. It's larger than Medicaid in terms of the number of Americans that it insures. And in this community, Medicaid is the most important funding source for our entire social safety net. Here in Santa Clara County, we have, as you may know, the largest public health and hospital system in Northern California. 4 hospitals, 15 community health centers, about a quarter of all Valley residents use these services. It is the largest provider of healthcare services in our community. And even if you don't come here from a healthcare background, what I first want to convey is these cuts will be so destabilizing that it's very likely we may have to close hospitals in a way that will be disruptive to our entire emergency and trauma care delivery system. So no matter where you normally get your care, all of us, when we dial 911, want an ambulance to come, and we want to be able to go in a reasonable amount of time to a hospital that can take care of our injury. And we are absolutely concerned with these cuts, which are going to hit our county health system to the tune of $1.3 billion annually, will destabilize those services. But more than that, our health system is built in part on a very effective drawing down of federal dollars, but also a substantial county general fund contribution. Thank you, Wendy, for the general fund contribution, because Medicaid and Medicare, as you know, don't pay the full cost of care. So for hospital systems like ours, which are safety net, open to all, the majority of our patients, the revenue they bring to us do not equal our expenses. So we need supplemental sources of revenue to stay in business. And our county general fund, to some extent, fills that gap to the tune of $600 million a year. What we are trying to avoid in the scenario that Measure A is trying to help us to avoid is putting our board of supervisors in a position where they're going to have to choose between keeping emergency departments open and gutting our shelter services, which are $250 million a year in funds for keeping people in shelter services, gutting our behavioral health system, gutting all our food assistance programs, our senior assistance programs, programs that dollars that come to this organization, Sunnyvale Community Services, and that are deployed through county contracts, through nonprofit organizations out into the community. So Medicaid, as I said, it's foundational to our entire safety net. When it is weakened, it's not just our healthcare services, it's food services, it's housing services, it's senior services, behavioral health services. All of that is at risk. So Measure A, to get back to your question, is our temporary bridge to get us through these next 5 years. As we'll walk you through, it doesn't solve all of our problems, but it's the difference between a catastrophic drawdown of services and a way that we can plan a reduction of services in a way that it minimizes human harm. Just to give you a sense of the numbers here, the federal cuts will equal $1.3 billion a year. Measure A is $330 million of that. Around $500 million is going to come through service reductions that the county is going to have to undergo, and those are going to be very difficult. And the rest is work we need to do with the state to draw down more Medicaid dollars that will still be coming to the state, to health systems and counties that disproportionately have very large Medi-Cal populations, which this county is one of those. That's going to be a longer, harder process, and there's no guarantee that will work, but it is a 3-pronged strategy. Again, there will be service cuts and reductions, but if we can do it in an organized way, minimizing human harm versus having to make immediate and very severe cuts, the goal of Measure A is to give us that pathway. So that's what Measure A is. You can learn more on our website, which is saveourlocalhospitals.com. Our top line goal is to prevent hospital and emergency department closure in Santa Clara County. That's our top line goal, but this is really about protecting the entire spectrum of county general fund social services, which again is an incredibly dynamic portfolio from supportive housing to senior nutrition and so many other important services in between that vulnerable people rely on. So that's Measure A, saveourlocalhospitals.com. And now we will get to your excellent questions. Wendy, was there anything you wanted to ask there? Okay.
Wait, just a minute, Mark. They're going to talk about it. Yeah, we're going to talk about it. Okay.
That's a government document. They're not allowed to publicize the campaign. Oh yeah, sorry. We have a couple documents for it. There's one the county prepared about the budget situation. The county obviously can't promote Measure A because it's the county, but I can. And so we have another document here for you. And you can download this on our website as well, saveourlocalhospitals.com, but we'll leave these here for you as well.
Okay, so Wendy is going to answer this question, and this tags on to what you just asked, Margaret, about the tax. Why was a regressive tax proposed for this measure? Why not propose another type of tax?
So, excellent question. And this is where I get to wonk out a little bit as a policy nerd. Unfortunately, unlike charter cities, the county has very limited taxing authority. So by state law, we can only assess taxes for things that we have explicit ability to. And the state law basically says sales taxes, and then there are other tax structures that we can tap, but they would have, based on county projections, would have basically generated not enough revenue for the type of gap that Michael just described. Earlier this year, Supervisor Lee, actually before the summer recess, he tried to initiate a process by which we were going to seek state legislation to essentially assess a millionaire's tax. But unfortunately, his colleagues were not very keen on that idea and watered that proposal down to actually think more broadly about the spectrum of revenue generation options that might be available to counties. And so that's kind of gave us license to explore those other avenues, including the sales tax measure that we have before us in the form of Measure A.
Okay, so this question may have already been answered by you, Michael, but I'm going to ask and see if you want to add something to it. This tax seems to be focused on federal cuts to healthcare, but there are many other cuts related to food, housing, and so forth. We cannot go back to the voters for taxes addressing these other needs. Are we abandoning people impacted by these other federal cuts? This is a really tough problem.
It's a great question. I think, part of the Measure A campaign and making it clear to voters the top line threat that we see, which is emergency department and hospital closure. But again, this is all tied together. So without Measure A, our Board of Supervisors is going to have to dig deeper into other programs that are funded by the county to keep emergency departments open. And even in that case, we're likely closing at least one. So there is we are, in some sense, Measure A, while we are emphasizing the hospital piece, and I'll give you a little inside baseball. Obviously, when you're running a campaign, you have to have a simple message. And we want to be very clear on the top line. This is Medicaid cuts driving this problem. But Measure A, if we wanted it to be, could be about food assistance, or it could be about housing, or it could be about senior service, because all of those are under threat. The more dollars we have to use to keep emergency departments open means fewer dollars for other services. So Measure A is a general tax. The Board of Supervisors is going to allocate it in the way that will help the maximum amount of people. Obviously, first and foremost is preventing ED closure, but this will have a knock-on effect across the entire spectrum of county services. So I think, to Wendy's point, if we had the authority, if the county had the authority to ask for more, it would. This is the maximum amount that the county is able to ask for in a sales tax. So we don't have the best options in front of us, but we're going to take what's there to preserve the most amount of services and protect the most amount of lives.
Just one other point that Michael mentioned. This is a general sales tax. If it were a dedicated tax, we would have to seek a higher voter threshold of 2/3 if it were a dedicated measure, which I think in this day and age is kind of a, a pipe dream. One other thing I'll mention, comparatively, the county of Santa Clara, when you look at the percentage of sales taxes that are actually allocated back to the county, we at the county of Santa Clara get 1/8 of a 1 cent. So that's, pales in comparison to what the county of Alameda gets, which is, I think, closer to 1.5% of their county sales tax goes back to the county and reinvested in their services. So we are barely scratching the surface in terms of what the county residents are actually getting in county services from the sales tax.
Okay, and I do see that there is a question in the chat, but I think what I'd like to do is wait until we're finished with these questions, and then we'll go to the chat. The next question, will there be a citizens committee to oversee the spending of these funds?
Leave it to Michael to talk about what's in the ballot language.
The ballot language does call for an independent citizens oversight committee. It'll likely, and in the ordinance passed by the Board of Supervisors, the board has to still designate what the structure of that will look like. So if the measure passes, that will happen. I think the model is the 2016 housing bond, which was chaired by Larry Stone and was a very credible oversight effort, and includes people that have a housing background, CPAs. This is going to be a little bit new because this is going to be the first time it's for a general tax. So I think this is actually going to be a really, and oversight boards are now part of sort of county culture. Whenever there's a revenue measure, there's always going to be some sort of citizen oversight board. The citizen oversight board doesn't have authority, but it is eyes on the spending, and it is a process which requires a more rigorous public reporting. We are talking with a lot of organizations that are interested, certainly health organizations, business organizations, and there will be obviously an open process on how those people apply for it and are appointed. But the board still has, just to be very clear, the board hasn't developed that structure yet. So there'll be an opportunity to weigh in with folks like Wendy if you're interested, and give her your ideas on how that should look. The board will do that work once the measure passes in November.
You're going to pass, huh, Wendy? Okay. So it was noted in some polls that Measure A will pass. In this case, what is the percentage of yes votes needed to pass?
It's a 50 plus 1 because it is a general tax. As I mentioned, if it were a dedicated tax, we'd be looking closer to 2/3. And unfortunately, the polling does not indicate a support for a threshold that high.
And the last question that we have is, there was a Spotlight article addressing the massive cuts by the federal government. This tax is anticipated to bring in $330 million. How, again, I think we kind of talked about this. How will this gap be bridged in losses for Northern California's largest public hospital system over the next 5 years?
It's going to be extraordinarily difficult. There is some amount of realignment that can occur. Now, our system, just so folks know, our county essentially rescued 3 distressed community hospitals. One is the only hospital in the East Valley. One is the only hospital in South County, and did so actually without having to go to the voters and asking for more revenue. In the old structure, pre-HR1, we felt there was sufficient federal revenue to maintain those services. But now that we're in a situation where there's not, there is going to be a hard look at where we have certain services and where is the most need, and yes, where can they generate the most revenue. So there's going to be some realignment that is about efficiency and drawing down more revenue, but there's no way to make up the gap without very hard cuts. People will lose their jobs. Access to healthcare services will be more challenged. And the goal for us there, again, with Measure A is, can we do that with a little glide path to do it as orderly as we can to minimize risk to people? Or do we have to do it very suddenly and without many tools? And so it will be hard. There's going to be some very good people that who will not be able to keep on serving their community, and that will be very difficult, but there's no getting around that right now.
Okay, so I'm going to start with questions in the chat, and then we can move the mic around in the room. So let's see. Oh, I guess this isn't a question. This is just, oh, Angela had put in a link. Thank you, Angela. Thank you. So does anybody have any questions of either Michael or Wendy in the room? You can raise your hand. We'll pass the mic. Angela has one.
Thank you for the presentation. Quite sobering. My background is in healthcare, and I was working at a free clinic before the Affordable Care Act. And then when the Affordable Care Act, luckily they laid me off because they didn't need me anymore and closed the clinic. I fear going back to those days. And this is the age-old question that I have at Livable Sunnyvale and for others is, you guys weren't here. So at the first protest, some of you guys know the story. I won't be very long. I had a sign at the First King's protest talking about they came for the trade unionists and I wasn't them and I wasn't them. And then they came for me. And on the reverse of that, I had a sign about the big, beautiful bill and how there is the potential that 12 million people will lose health care coverage. And I put it in perspective, that's the entire state of North Carolina. So a young lady came up to me and she goes, "Where did you get that from? Where did you get that statistic?" And I said, the budget of reconciliation, came out with these numbers and it's pretty certain that this is what's going to happen. Well, that's a lie, she said to me. And then she proceeded to tell me that Medicaid is just a sham and we can all agree on that. And it was very confrontational. But my point of telling that story is I had no reaction to tell her because she firmly believed that that was not a fact. Not that many people were going to lose health care and that Medicaid is a waste of money. But what people don't quite understand and what you articulated so well is clinics are going to close. When we have an accident out in, Gilroy, that closest hospital may not be open. So when you have trauma, that place may not be open and you're going to go far. So when we know, okay, I'm off my rant, but I guess how do we share this with more people so that they understand this is really, really bad? That's the first question. And the second question is, do we need to go to the state and say, this is going to be bad for the whole state? Santa Clara County sales tax can't do it all.
On how do we tell the story was the question.
Places are going to close. It's not
Yeah.
just going to be your poor friend who doesn't have health insurance.
Yep.
Places are going to close. You are not going to be able to get health care for your son who gets injured on the baseball field.
Well, first I'll give you the obvious stuff, which is, and we are moving very fast on this campaign. So follow our social media. And I know that's an easy one. That doesn't, and we go to our website and we have opportunities to get involved. We need people to host information settings, invite us to more meetings like this. We will have a social media toolkit. We have downloadable one-pagers. We need help getting the word out, and the fact that you have experience practicing in a pre-Affordable Care Act setting. The projections are really grim. We're going to have projection minimum 3 million people in California losing their Medicaid now, or Medi-Cal as we call it in California. It has to be Cal, right? Yeah, no. If we can fit Cal into it, that's the law here. You have to say Cal, and that's just Medi-Cal. So people who are in covered California who are going to see their subsidies go down aren't going to be able to afford coverage. We have a whole, the undocumented are going to lose their coverage. So we're going to see a much larger number. We're going to go back to a day. Right now, our uninsured rate in this county is less than 5%, and we're going to go to 6 figures of uninsured. It's going to be back to how it was temporarily. So, but here's what I will say. Measure 8 to me is, yes, an emergency measure, but to me, it's also a bit of light in the darkness. And this is an opportunity for us as a community to remind ourselves that our health is both a personal thing but a social thing, and we have a shared destiny together, and we can use Measure A as a platform to show the state that people believe in public services, that people are not going to allow the federal government to close our hospitals and our health centers and our food banks and our schools and everything else that they're trying to close. And does this fix all our problems? No, but it's a way for us to point to the world we want to live in. So I think there's, as much as this is grim, to me, there's some optimism in Measure A, and there's an opportunity for us to give strength and hope to other communities that next year are going to have to do the same thing and do the hard work of campaigning to their voters. So to get the vote out, I mean, do all the easy stuff. Donate to the campaign. We need to raise a lot of money to get the word out, so we need your dollars as well. Follow us in social, share it with your folks, and then sign up on our website and invite us to more meetings like this, or have folks over here at your home, and Wendy and I will show up and we'll do the same, dog and pony show here.
No, I'll just add, wearing my official county hat for just 2 seconds here. Our office will be holding a special District 3 roundtable meeting in about 2 weeks, 2 weeks from tomorrow night, where we're focused specifically on more of those sobering facts about what the impacts of HR1 are going to look like locally. And so we're working to establish some outstanding panelists who are going to give us the real deal about what's happening on the ground and what some of the impacts we're seeing. I was here earlier today, as Marie mentioned, during one of Sunnyvale Community Services distribution days, and the line of cars was just down the street. And that has only grown since the pandemic, and as Marie will attest, has not stopped since. So I want to put a plug in for that. I'll also, we are building out a page on Supervisor Lee's website, which is focused solely on the impacts of HR1 and the budget cuts. So we'll have information and videos in language as well. So we would love for you to share that information. Follow us on socials if you haven't already, because that's where we are putting a lot of that information in our newsletter, as well as on all of our social media channels. And thank you for the other question about what we're doing at the state level. I'm pleased to say, yes, obviously the sales tax measure is just one way we're hoping to, kind of stave off some of the most egregious cuts. I'm proud to say that almost every member of our state delegation, legislative delegation, has endorsed the measure, which is outstanding because they understand. You'll hear them talk about, what in Sacramento, Assemblymember Mark Berman, as they were voting on the on whether or not to put Proposition 50 on the ballot, was basically cited what we're doing here in Santa Clara County, because we know how egregious these cuts are. The state alone can't do it. I want to tell you, we're doing everything we can at the county with our intergovernment relations team, working with our state elected officials to stave off those cuts. We've regularly gone to Sacramento, but it's going to take all of us. And so our legislators at all levels, including the state, need to hear from all of us about what we're seeing the impacts of HR1 on the ground are, because I think in Sacramento, and certainly, even at the county, we can be a little bit insulated from that. And so, helping us tell the story and getting that word out would be critical. And so that state advocacy is just part of our three-prong advocacy strategy we have at the county: raise revenue measures, raise revenue, continue to advocate for state assistance, and then 3, look at how we can continue to, make painful cuts to try to stave off some of the worst cuts we can in terms of the county budget.
So I think before I take your question, Margaret, I want to add on to what Emily was saying about the line that she saw today, and the line we see every Wednesday. At one point in time, the people that would come to SCS for food were coming for supplemental food. Now they are coming for their food. So that shows you how dire things have gotten for our neighbors. So, Margaret, let me pass this to you. Oh, just a sec. Wait, who has a question? Okay.
Yeah, so hello, name's Jonathan. So I was just kind of wondering, for people who are like undocumented, what resources or like things they can like, what are like they gonna have after like the cuts like happen and like they don't have the Medi-Cal anymore? Like, what can they do for like their families and like their kids, and like what are the options available like for them?
So obviously, HR1 has definitely limited, it's done a number of egregious things, namely, it basically rolled back a lot of the expansions that we had under the Affordable Care Act, including state-only Medi-Cal for undocumented adults. So with that basically being put on hold effective and actually in a few months' time, as you heard Michael say, we're going to have a lot of folks that are going to fall out of our health system. We're already seeing, particularly immigrant communities, a fear of even accessing any government service, whether it's healthcare related or not, because of the immigration enforcement entities that are now seeming to pop up everywhere. Luckily, the county is the local safety net, and so they will still be welcome at any of our facilities. We don't ask for citizenship, papers at the ER registration. We serve everyone. We're here to protect everyone, and our county is standing firm with that. We have amazing partners like Sunnyvale Community Services Agency that are going to continue to do what they can to help support our local community with rental assistance, food assistance. But again, we've lost a lot of the tools that we've traditionally used to provide these core services because of the devastating cuts that HR1 has left.
Margaret, did you have a question?
Super basic. How much is the tax? I saw two different figures. And then you said, and I didn't quite understand this, we only get like 0.1% back from, I don't understand that at all. We get, anyway, I just don't understand that. If we're putting that sales tax on, doesn't all of that come back to the county? And then the other question is, are other counties doing the same tax?
Thanks, Margaret, for the question. So it is a 5/8 cent sales tax, which is basically the maximum amount we can charge under the existing cap. So in theory, yes, all that money comes back to the county, but the portion that actually goes back into county services, like providing nonprofit contracts to providers like safety net providers like Sunnyvale Community Services, or keeping the Valley Medical Center doors or the Valley Health Center clinics here in Sunnyvale open. The portion of that local sales tax that actually comes back to us currently is 1/8 of 1 cent. 1/8 of 1 cent. Compared to Alameda County. Yeah. VTAs gets the vast majority of that. I think it's like 62.5 cents, but basically they get the lion's share of the local sales tax is going to VTA, and only 1/8 of 1 cent is coming back to and being reinvested in county services. Alameda, of their local sales tax, 1.5% of their local sales tax is going back and being reinvested back into county emergency safety net services.
Does that answer it, Margaret? Okay. So,
5/8.
yeah, it's 5/8. Oh.
Yes.
Oh, did you hear what Margaret had said? Okay, I'm going to quote Margaret right now for those of you that didn't hear it. Cynical Margaret was asking, after 5 years when it sunsets, does the tax go away? What do you think, Margaret? Yeah, right. Okay, hang on. There's another question. Or does somebody want to give an educated answer to that other than my cynical answer?
So the tax does go away. The Board of Supervisors would have to place a renewal on the ballot, and the voters would have to approve it. What I would say is the 5 years is timed on when theoretically a new administration and a new Congress is seated and able to pass legislation that restores Medicaid funding. So if there's something to be worried about, I would be more worried about, will that happen than what the board decides. I don't think sales taxes are a long-term solution to funding healthcare services in the county, but we don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. So it's hard for me to predict, but it is a way we are trying to tell the voters we see this for now as a short-term measure, but obviously we have to have some things happen at a national level for conditions to change.
Himanshu, did you have a question? And then, okay, sorry, Vice Mayor.
Hi, I'm Linda Sell and Vice Mayor, but speaking in my personal capacity, this weekend I was at a booth at Pride, and we were talking about Measure 8 to all the people passing by. And it was an easy explanation. I just had to say there's going to be over $1 billion cut to the county, and that could equate to emergency room trauma centers being closed, so your loved ones and you might be impacted and have to go farther. And this Measure A is just for 5 years, and it's not for the whole $1 billion. It's for over 300 million. So it's not going to solve everything, but it's going to make it a little easier. So, and pretty much everybody was like, it made sense because it's not for the whole $1 billion. They realize $600 million has to be cut in some other way drastically, and it's for 5 years. So they thought that was very good in trying to find a short-term solution. So it seemed like it wasn't hard to explain it. But as said, we need to get more people to be talking about it. We need to get the funding to get more information out. So, but well worth it, like $300 million, well worth it if we can get more support from the voters.
Do you want to add something to that? No? Okay.
Hi, my name is Manshu. Rose says hi, by the way. So how will these funds be prioritized across the different social services that will see cuts from federal support? Right, so I think this may be hospitals, but you mentioned there are other social services as well that are going to take a hit. Second question also is, what long-term fiscal and reserve strategies are we considering to prevent a future crisis of this magnitude?
Thanks for the questions. So obviously, because this is a general sales tax, we can't designate, how the funds will be spent, and again, that would require, if it was a dedicated tax, then we would require the threshold. So the Board of Supervisors, actually starting in October, will actually have a study session about kind of our fiscal outlook and how, again, we won't know starting in October whether or not the measure will pass, but we're already starting some of that kind of like scenario planning. Obviously, our priority with these funds would be to keep our health and hospital system open, but obviously there are going to be ripple effects across the county, the county and all of our services and department. Of course, we want to try to keep those cuts as far away from people as we can, and just make sure that we can keep our communities whole. So I think, the board is going to have to make some very difficult decisions about how to prioritize. I think we were going to try to make sure that we can, fulfill the county's mission of supporting basic needs for our community members. So if it's food assistance, again, we're seeing some of these onerous requirements for some of these federal support programs like, food stamps. We're going to try to do everything we can to keep those basic needs assistance services like the ones that here at Sunnyvale Community Services provide as much as possible. But again, we're also looking at tightening our own belts at the county and figuring out if we can also increase efficiencies so we can generate some more money, so we can spread that savings around and combined with the revenue we hope to generate through the sales tax measure to kind of keep us whole. But again, we still have a huge gap that we're going to have to close. And again, those are going to be very difficult decisions that my boss and his colleagues are going to have to make starting in the fall.
So I think the spirit of your question, the second part, was around sort of sustainability and how do we get back to a position where we can maintain these operations in this new environment. And first of all, our county health system is a mission-oriented system, so our objective is to be open to all, regardless of ability to pay, and to offer the best possible care in every way that we can. if we wanted to just invest in services that were the most profitable and cut services that weren't, we could do that, but that would result in huge service gaps and people going without care. And that's what's different from our system than any other system that does have to have a bottom line and make a decision based on what their shareholders demand of them. But the county also has limits. The county obviously has enormous pressure on its general fund. So we have to think about how do we operate in a way that is sustainable. And part of what Measure A is helping us get to is transforming to go to that direction and minimize the human impact. I have some confidence we can do this in that we were able to acquire these 3 other distressed hospitals, restore services there, and do that without having to go to the taxpayers to ask for more taxpayer contribution. We were able to do that within the revenue that those services were generating and restore services to the community. But for any of you that run a business, it's hard to change your model overnight. So we're going to have to do that, and it's going to mean a slight change in the types of patients we serve in some cases. And unfortunately, I think this is to what the gentleman on the corner there was talking about. The thing that's how this plays out is that for some folks, they're just going to have to wait longer for services. And all of us have had probably healthcare experience where we need a specialist and we're told, when is this appointment? 3 months from now? That's really frustrating. That can lead to worse outcomes. So that's going to be the hard part for us, is we're just not going to have the resources to serve everyone we want, but I'm confident in our ability to at least reconfigure the system to be sustainable and stay operating and offer a tremendous amount of service still. But without Medicaid funding restored, we're not going to be able to operate at where we are right now. And just to give you just a couple anecdotes, Regional Medical Center was the hospital that we rescued on the east side of San Jose, and we had really no choice to do it because it's a trauma center. When their trauma services closed, our county was only left with 2 trauma centers. That's Valley Medical Center in San Jose and Stanford, obviously in Palo Alto. And that was an unsustainable amount of trauma for just 2 hospitals for a metro area this large. So we really needed to restore services there. When we did that, their average daily census under their previous ownership was, somewhere around 60 patients a day. And we've more than doubled that. And I'm not here to say we're happy there's more sick people in the hospital. What's that telling me is that there was need in the community that wasn't being met. And when we restore services, that need comes to us. So we could open a whole other hospital and fill it up. There's that much unmet need in this community. We don't have the funds to do that. So it's going to be a hard journey. But I'm confident that we have the capacity and the mindset to get to a place where at least we're sustainable. When it comes to reserves and things like that, we would all love that. There's so much need for county services. It's hard to tell a taxpayer we're going to hold some of your dollars back when there's need now. But that's something that is also going to be looked at as well. Absolutely, because it was brought up in the board hearing about reserves, and the board is going to study that as well. I think that's going to be a harder hill to climb, though, given the constraints. Absolutely. I mean, I think our whole system wants to move that way. It's sick people that come to a hospital are worse outcomes for them, and they're expensive. And that's a broader problem in American healthcare. We have 15 community-based health centers, including one on Fair Oaks. So we have a massive primary care network. It's the busiest part of our system. That's where we want people to be. And we are swimming against bad food policy, bad employment policy, bad, that drives illness to us. But that's a bigger transformation that we have been on in my entire 17 years at the foundation, of how do we move our system from dealing with injury and illness to how do we achieve health. There's a lot of good work there, a lot of good work that Medicaid was funding that now is gone. So this is going to be a bit of a retrenchment, but yeah, I agree. Where can we think about population health and reduce unneeded visits to the hospital that generate lots of uncompensated care for us? Absolutely. If we can invest in those programs, and that's what we're doing on the philanthropy side, where can we try pilots that will, demonstrate that it's improving the health outcomes for the population we're targeting and reduce hospitalizations? There's a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah. Sorry, Marie, I've kept you waiting for a long time. Go ahead.
What I get for not being there. But first of all, Wendy, thank you for bringing up the fact that food stamps again announced today was day 1 of the food stamp cuts, which are devastating. It means that people who are 55 or younger who do not have a dependent child have to prove that they're working, or disabled and do it every 6 months, which is nearly impossible to try to navigate the federal paperwork. So the need for food, and food is medicine. But and Angela brought up the fact that there used to be a Rotocare clinic that was free at El Camino Hospital, which she was the wonderful pharmacist of, which closed 10 years ago. And we've been asked, Sunnyvale Community Services has been asked to host the Rotocare clinic once a week here. You've already seen what our food lines look like. We are not a healthcare provider, but we know that health care is key to keeping people housed and fed, and so we've been in conversation with them, and Angela went to one of the meetings. Believe me, I've been to too many meetings on this. And we're really hesitant to plow into this because, oh my God, would that pull us in a different direction? Is there a way to possibly partner with folks? Because we really want to know what our role is, because because we're a place of entry, we're a place of community, and where people come for many, many different needs, and many of them are in dire health situations when they walk in our door or are facing them at home. And how do we get in that mix? And for example, there aren't enough services here in Sunnyvale and in this part of the county. And so I'll put a plug in for that, because Fair Oaks Clinic is by no means adequate enough. And the reason that the Rotocare people came to us is they said that they've looked, and there is a huge, huge need, unmet need for people who don't have access to health care here in Sunnyvale. And do we have to send them to the urgent care? Where do they go, especially if they're not documented? And we're already seeing this. And is this something that we should partner with you on, or is this something we should partner with Rotocare on, or should we, advocate for something else? But what is our role, given that we are an entry point and a safety net place? And what will we be getting into? And Angela, you can hold me back from any of this because you know better than anybody. And I was a volunteer when we did it at El Camino for many, many years, but we stopped it in 2015. So that's my soliloquy there.
So thank you, Marie, for those very sobering comments. We know that there's a lot of unmet need here in terms of healthcare access in the northern part of the county, quite frankly. And a couple of years ago, Supervisor Lee, with then former Supervisor Semidian, actually championed trying to get a clinic on on this part of the county at De Anza College because of that unmet need, and working with former trustee and now assembly member Patrick Ahrens to do that, which was critical. But of course, because of our current funding situation, those conversations have a little bit have stalled because there's just no money to build a new facility. We've also had some initial conversations with leaders here in the city of Sunnyvale to think about, can we put an urgent care here in Sunnyvale or somewhere in the northern part of the county? And again, we would love to do that, but given our current fiscal situation, we're not able to do that. I think, the county stands at the ready to partner with Sunnyvale Community Services and other CBOs here in Sunnyvale to provide, more supports and access. And we're so grateful that SES is such an anchor institution. We certainly welcome those conversations. We're happy to think creatively of what that could look like, we can. I think all of us, this community has a strong history of collaboration to support our neighbors in need, and I think this measure and this time, quite frankly, is just another indication of how we can be stronger together.
Are there any other questions before I let Wendy and Michael say their last remarks or share last thoughts? Okay. Would you like to a song? Song and dance here, literally. Okay then.
We were thinking of a haiku earlier, but maybe not a song and dance. Well, we'll have to get back to you on that one. Just on behalf of the campaign, we're just so grateful for the space that Livable Sunnyvale has created for us this evening. Wanted to throw out a couple of other opportunities to get involved. This weekend, the South Bay Labor Council on Saturday is hosting our volunteer kickoff for basically getting the word out to the masses. That is, we would convene at the Labor Council in North San Jose, 2302 Zinker Road at 9 a.m. on Saturday. We would love to have you there. We're going to have a number of elected officials and other speakers that are going to be there to really motivate our walkers that day. We are also hosting a bigger kind of kickoff press conference for and rally on the Valley Medical Center campus a week from today at noon. And we're just going to, again, talk about what this measure will do, how transformative it will be, and how absolutely critical it is. I'll put a plug in, and thank you, Angela, for already putting, for those of us, for the members who are viewing at home, our website, which is saveourlocalhospitals.com. And so we need all of you. We would love to have you invite us into your neighborhoods to have more of these community conversations, because it's that one-to-one connection that's really going to get us over the finish line in November. And I'll turn it over to Michael.
You said it beautifully. I just really appreciate the time and the questions, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. These are difficult times, but we have something positive that we can do that will make an impact. So just appreciate you all for the questions, and we're available. You can find my contact information at valleyhealthfoundation.org. Happy to follow up with any additional questions that you might have.
So I would like to thank Wendy and Michael for coming back to SCS and for staying so late and spending your time. Thank you.
So thank you all. And Wendy and Michael, that was amazing. A bit sobering, but there was light. We have an offsite board meeting on Saturday, so we should be, we will vote on Saturday whether this is something that we can endorse. I feel confident that that's where we'll go. Thank you all for being here. This was a lot tonight, but I was reading, one of my favorite authors is Atul Gawande, and he talked about, policies, decisions, and policies get made around a kitchen table in small groups. And I think Margaret Mead also said something along the lines of, never doubt what small minds and small people can do to create change. So I'm hopeful. Thank you very much. And that concludes our meeting of Livable Sunnyvale for September. Next month, we will be having a group talking about mass timber, and our other speaker is, Agnes, help me out. Yeah, somebody, mass timber, and Mid-Penn, I believe, is going to present about their affordable housing on Matilda. So more stuff to come. Thank you very much and have a good night.